This is the Doc and Krueger cast, the official podcast of Doc and Krueger Games. Season 1, Episode 20, Fiasco. Hello friends, welcome to another episode of the Doc and Krueger cast. I'm Chris Krueger and I'm joined today by Adam Doc Brackin.
Hey everybody.
And today we're continuing our series on games that are out there that have influenced us as designers and that in particular influenced the Roll With It system, which is our theme for the season.
And this episode is a fiasco, a total fiasco.
Yes, it will be. Because we are talking about Bully Pulpit Games Fiasco. This is a very unique game, a very cool one though.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a GM-less game with lots and lots of elements of improv. I think I've actually heard the creator talk a little bit about how he was in improv theater for a while and he took a lot of what he learned there to apply to making this game.
It shows too.
It's kind of roughly inspired by Coen Brothers films. That is to say, they're stories about people with high ambition and low impulse control.
That's a good way to say it.
And the idea is in the title that you're basically going to have these people who come up with this this plan to get rich or to do whatever else. We'll get into some of this setup here in a minute. And then things are probably almost definitely going to go very, very wrong for them.
Those kind of movies stress me out. I don't know. I like Fiasco though. I don't know what the difference is.
Mm-hmm. Maybe it's because you're invested. You feel like you've got some control.
There you go. I'm in control of my own horrible demise.
And one of the things that I really love about this system is, when you are setting up your game, because there's a potentially lengthy setup process, but it's actually quite a lot of fun, where first you figure out what play set you're going to be using. So these are kind of like suggested settings, scenarios, if you will. Kind of like there are different fun names for them, but one might be, for example, Suburbia. One might be, we played one actually on the Backward Compatible podcast for a holiday special, Poppleton Mall, which is a Christmas themed scenario about being in kind of like a small town mall.
I was the hoodlum, yo.
There's one that's like set in an Antarctic research lab or something like that.
That's the thing.
Yeah, it's basically the thing.
That's totally the thing. And I just, yeah, that's great.
And so like lots of different settings like this, and there are people constantly coming out with the new ones. It's pretty cool. And what you do is you establish, first of all, the relationships between each of the players at the table. And so you kind of go around and like, if you say seated around a circular table, the person on the left and the person on your right, you're going to have a particular relationship
And
with.
I love that mechanic.
And this is generated, basically you roll a whole bunch of dice to start, depending on how many players you have. And you populate these note cards with things that kind of establish your relationship with someone, maybe a shared need that you both have, and a detail around your relationship or the need.
Yeah, normally I'm not a huge fan of tables and RPGs, but this is a case where it's just fun.
Yeah, and you pull from these tables basically each type of die to pull from like a particular category. So like the list of shared needs you might have might be like, say, a 6 or something like that. And then underneath that, there's 1 through 6 like details that you can pull from.
Yeah.
And so you
something about them being horrible makes it fun. I don't know. It just chart of horribleness.
But what you end up having by the time you're done with this is at least 2 characters at the table. If like you might have more than 3 players, in which case multiple, like there's some people you might not be directly connected to, but you have a bit of a backstory and sometimes a bit of a story prompt for, here's how we know each other. Here's this background we have, and here's this thing that we're trying to accomplish. And then based on that, you sort of go forward with like, hey, we've got this plan for, say, like we need to get out of town for some reason. Here's how we're going to get out of doing X, Y, or Z, or maybe for some reason there's like actually something blocking us from getting out of town. So here's how we're going to get past it, that sort of thing. And these sort of serve as your story prompts going forward. And then there's this cool scene-based system, which is something that we're fond of in the Roll With It system, quite obviously.
Yes.
Where when it's your turn to do a scene, you either decide, I want a good outcome or a bad outcome, and then the table decides what the sort of setup is for that scene. Or you say, I'm going to set up my scene, and then the table is going to decide the outcome. Basically, either it's going to go well for your character, or it's going to go poorly based on whether they hand you a white die or a black die.
And that's clever. It really speaks into the intent of the design. in that you as a character cannot control both things. Because I would think that it would be fair to say that in most RPGs or the traditional RPGs, you declare your intent and then you roll to see if you succeed.
Right.
And if you don't, then that's when things arguably go bad for you. This is completely turning that on its head. And I like that as a design concept. Instead of it being something where the mechanics are stacked against you and it's highly unlikely that you will succeed and then you have to react to that, you have full control. We'll call it narrative control over, okay, I'm going to fail gloriously here. Throw me in. And it's a very different way of telling a story. And you feel the agency, to use exactly the right word. It is preserved. And I think one of the dangers of a more, crunchy, rigorous, but dangerous system is to deny the player their agency. And if done wrong, that can be not fun. Mm-hmm. This is the reason I don't like the Dark Souls video game.
And so the other thing that Fiasco has that's pretty cool is kind of this 2-act structure, where the first act is about kind of establishing who your characters are, what their plans are, what they're trying to accomplish. And then Act 2 happens after what's called the tilt. It's kind of the intermission. And what ends up happening is based on the dice that you've collected, you roll a bunch of things and basically it decides what twist happens in between acts that are going to like really just throw things, just make everything go haywire and make everything start to spiral into chaos, where all your well-laid plans do not come to fruition usually.
Yeah, exactly.
That there's a really cool system for that too, to sort of generating the tilt. And this is also again based on the numbers of dice that you roll and that sort of stuff. And the proportion of white and black die that you have is also going to play into that. Where that also comes into play is at the end of the game, after everything's kind of resolved, everyone's played out all their scenes, you kind of have an epilogue. What ends up happening to your character, what becomes of them, is determined by the number of white and black dice that you have. So what tends to be the best thing is you want to steer away from having a balance of white and black. You want to either have like all black or all white, because the more binary you are, the higher the chances are that something good's going to happen to your character. Whereas if you're somewhere in the middle, it's usually going to end poorly for your character. Without getting too deep into exactly how those mechanics work, that's kind of the gist. Now, one of the things that's interesting about Fiasco is because it's so very improv-y, it's kind of like you jump into a scene, you kind of play things out, and beyond kind of the prompts that the game gives you, it's pretty much you're free to just kind of generate your own story.
Yeah, it's very freeform.
And so it's difficult for some people, especially if they're new to role-playing games, or it helps to have someone there who's experienced who can kind of help people with generating this stuff. Some people will take to it more naturally than others. I think there can be there's a possibility that people who are used to a more traditional style of role playing games, where it's more kind of being told what's happening and them reacting to it.
Yeah.
If you don't have people who are able to kind of contribute creatively to something, or to kind of improv in a way, they're not going to maybe find this as attractive as some other people.
That's very true. I think the key for me when I was learning was to really focus in on those aspects, the relationships between the other characters next to you, and let those be like driving forces, motivations, if you will. There's a strong connection here, I think, between that and in our Roll With It system, the idea of a motif, a character motif.
Absolutely. And, I mentioned that you can have those shared relationships with people, shared needs, but you can also have like things like shared objects, other little details, which does kind of become naturally a motif in whatever your personal story arc is, because at some point that object is going to come into play in your story. Now, how it comes into play is kind of up to interpretation. I think back to the example of when we played Poppleton Mall in Roll With It. The tilt told us that one of the twists is that someone was going to get killed. Probably on accident, but we weren't entirely sure.
We were all dreading that too, and it was like, is this the moment? Is this the moment?
And we also established that a key object was going to be a reindeer's antler.
Right.
And so what ended up happening is the death occurred due to that reindeer's antler. Someone fell accidentally and was impaled and was killed in the mall.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, Christmas is canceled.
That was the tagline.
Yeah. So there's kind of like this fun creative exercise of taking these pieces and figuring out how they fit into the puzzle of your story, which is very, very cool.
Yeah.
And so between that kind of improv nature and kind of like working from prompts and having these relationships and playing off of each other. And I think even at one point in the very, very, very early stages of the Roll With It system, we talked before about our first test that was basically just like we were improving entirely with very, very little structure.
Yeah, there was no mechanics at all.
When we started introducing some mechanics in the scene-based system that we had, one point actually had multiple acts where there was going to be a turning point in the episode where things changed somewhat or whatever. I forget exactly what it was. We ended up moving away from it because it was feeling a little bit too prescriptive. We wanted to be more open-ended, but we still wanted to have like that 5-scene structure to an episode. But Fiasco does this really cool thing where by the nature of the 2-act structure and the tilt and all this different stuff, it does kind of give you this good narrative arc, which is the sort of arc they're going for in Fiasco, which is, again, these terrible plans you come up with and how they go horribly wrong.
Up and then back down again.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just every paper airplane must come down, and that's what happens. In this case, a terrible crash.
And everyone kind of has to be on board with that thing, know what they're getting into, and kind of embrace the suck, as it were.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a lot of fun. Actually, one of the really fun things to come out of this is a YouTube series called Tabletop with Will Wheaton. They did an episode where they played Fiasco, and they brought on a screenwriter, an actor, Will Wheaton himself as an actor, and then another writer who like does nonfiction, but obviously like knows a lot about stories and that sort of thing. And so it's just this awesomely fun thing in this game that's inspired by Coen Brothers films and improv and kind of production to see trained writers and actors kind of run with this thing.
Yeah.
And it was such a fun thing to watch. It was like being in a writer's room coming up with this film.
Yeah, that was a good one. That's a favorite. It's worth catching.
So definitely go check that one out if you want to get a sense of what Fiasco plays like. They explain some of the rules too, which is kind of nice.
Well, I think with Fiasco, the act of character creation is a part of the game. It's not really a game that's intended to go on as a campaign for, more than one session or weeks or months or anything like that. It's just not what that game is.
Yeah, no, it's designed for one shots, and there was a kind of expansion companion book that came out later that suggested how you can turn it into like, say, a trilogy or something like that. But that wasn't a part of the game to begin with.
No, it really wasn't. And, in that respect, understanding that, a third of your playtime is going to be creating and building up to, to having and creating those characters, if you will. Compare that to, say, Lady Blackbird, which we talked about in the last episode, where all of the interplay of the characters were created beforehand. And you can really see the contrast there because they're actually very similar in that regard, in that the characters are interconnected and that you really, the engine of the systems, if you will, is that the characters are working both at odds and also together on these sort of shared, goals or the world's goals, if you will. And these elements that, from the beginning, are there, but you don't know how they're going to all play out. And the way that those two systems approach that is so completely different. One is like, here it all is, go. And then in Fiasco, it's like, here it all is, figure it out. And
again, there's no GM in this game. So it comes down to the group kind of influencing, either setting up the scene for whoever's turn it is or deciding how the scene's going to play out for them. Yeah. But it is pretty much just everyone kind of throwing in their ideas and kind of building off of each other, which is, again, another core principle of improv.
Right.
So,
now, to be fair, when we did the Poppleton Mall scenario, you actually did facilitate it for us as the one who had read the rules the most and understood what was happening, but you did not interfere.
I did not GM. Yeah, no,
I did not in any way storytell.
Yeah.
You just simply helped us know mechanically what needed to happen next and move it along, which was important because we were live casting it. But
and also, one of the reasons I did that is because I didn't want to overcrowd the table. We already had a lot of players.
We had like 6 or 7 people.
We had a lot of guests.
But it worked. So, it worked really well, actually. So it's kind of nice, even with a big table, that everybody is connected by 1 or 2 degrees of separation, friend of a friend kind of thing. And that came through in that story, I think. It really did.
Or even rivalries, because there was one example I'm thinking of where Will's character and Sarah's character were competitors. They were like kind of next door neighbors with their shops in the mall.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And there was a lot of animosity between them, which was very funny. So even if we don't end up pulling a lot like mechanically directly aside from the ideas of, scenes and that sort of thing, The closest parallel you could draw between Fiasco and the Roll With It system is, the scene-based structure. And even though they treat the setup and resolution differently than we do, there is still that idea of setting up what the scene's about and then deciding how it is resolved.
That's true. And I would say that there is an open-endedness, a strong, well, you've been talking about the improv DNA that is in that system. There is a strong improv DNA in Roll With It as well.
Yeah.
And I think that comes from some of our experiences with Fiasco, frankly.
And I think that both systems, and this is neither a good thing nor a bad thing, it's just kind of it's a result of the nature of these games, is that you do kind of need to have people who are invested in contributing to the story, and who are willing to kind of take the guidelines that the game gives you and build something cool out of it, because neither of these systems, Fiasco or Roll With It, is going to hold your hand in that way.
Right.
They can give you great things to work from, but it is going to come down to how you as the group decide to handle the story. Far from that being a bad thing, it's just something that you need to be aware of when you play, where you need to recognize that we've all decided this is the story we're going for. In Fiasco, they give you a little bit more guidance on, like, here's the tone that's intended by this playset or by the game itself, the kind of general arc you're going to take. Roll With It system's even more open-ended in that regard. But we talked about early in this season, making sure that you talk with your group about understanding the tone and the setting and the genre that you're going for, and then all working together to use the guidelines set up by the system to guide your collaborative storytelling venture, as it were.
Very much so. If you take it too seriously, I don't think it's going to work. I think it really is meant to be dark comedy. Almost all improv is comedy. And so if you understand that that's what this is, dark comedy, or to use a different term, black comedy. It is ultimately about the horrible failure of everything going wrong, and it is a fiasco. And I think that that's a core difference between the intent of the improv that goes into Fiasco versus the intent of the improv that's in our Roll With It system, is that we're not really shooting for comedy specifically. You can, but I think that you can tell very intense and serious stories with the Roll With It system.
Yeah, so in the spirit of, trying out new things maybe you haven't tried out before, if you're interested in story games and haven't had a chance to play Fiasco, definitely give it a shot. You may or may not find that you or your group is super into it. You might find that it's one of the more fun and kind of refreshing games you've played in a while, if you do find that you're into it.
It's great for a one-shot.
Definitely great for a one-shot. It's very kind of low commitment. Like I said, also maybe go check out some of the stuff online of people playing it. The tabletop example is a really excellent one. They'll maybe help you ease into the idea, see where it takes you, and see how it might affect your play or your design moving forward. I think there are definitely some interesting things to be gleaned from it, even if you don't, again, find it to be a direct inspiration for a lot of what you do.
Yep.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us for Season 1, Episode 20 of the Doc and Krueger cast, our discussion on Fiasco and how it's influenced us. I'm Chris.
I'm Doc.
And we'll see you next time. The Doc and Krueger cast is a production of Doc and Krueger Games, jointly hosted by Adam Doc Brackin and Chris Krueger. The theme music was composed by Nick Krueger. The Roll With It system is available now. You can find it and our other games through our website, docandkrueger.com.